Okay. I just saw Anna's comment. Thank you, Anna, for your compliment on my shawl. I'll talk about that in a second. So hi, welcome to my studio. My name is Janna, and I'm a tapestry weaver by trade, and a knitter, longtime knitter. The first craft that I picked up was knitting, and I'm a natural dyer. So when I learned tapestry in 2008, I also, in that same semester at school, learned natural dyeing. And those were actually the first two techniques that they taught us in those respective fields. So it was the program that I took was a 2-year technical textile program at Capilano University. It's since closed, sadly. In 2013, it closed after having run for about maybe 40 years, I think, or close to 40 years. Super sad. But the first thing they taught us was natural dyeing and tapestry. And I was, like I said, just a knitter at that time. And I don't know if it was some sort of like funny thing because they were the first things that I learned. And I was so excited to be in the program that it just kind of imprinted on me. And I just invariably came back to it, or if it's the ancient handcraft artwork aspect of these two techniques that draw me back to it, because I think essentially, and what I love about those two things is the slowness of them. So tapestry is a bit different from other kinds of weaving in that it's in a couple of different ways. It's weft faced. So weft faced meaning the weft that you weave with completely covers the warp, which is what dresses the loom. And so all we see in the end is the weft. And because of that, it takes quite a lot longer to weave a piece on a more balanced weave, like this piece here by Anna Isabel. You can see both the warp and the weft. And that just tends to go a bit faster because you're not packing it down as much. The other aspect that makes tapestry a lot slower is that this technique allows for shape building. So it's one of the few weaving techniques where you can really go to town and just completely design a piece. And it's kind of like the most painterly, not that I like to compare it to painting. There's a whole historical conversation about that. But yeah, you can project any image that you desire onto a woven plane using tapestry, and that's pretty cool. So tapestry is what I came back to in the world of weaving, and natural dyeing is what I came back to after having tried all the different kinds of dyes within the field of textiles. And after that 2-year program, I moved to Montreal and finished my degree in textiles at Concordia, and eventually moved to the States, where I had just had my child, and Murex Looms sponsored my art practice. And we did a kind of social exchange where I blogged for them and they sent me free looms and other things to go with my loom. So, oops, excuse me. This big loom here is one that I purchased later, but they gave me a 16-inch loom, which is just right here. You can't see it, but they sent me the 16-inch loom. I was a new mom living in a big city. My partner was doing a PhD, and it was just kind of the perfect time. I had just graduated from my degree, had my kid, and was living in a tiny apartment, having a little loom that I could pack up behind the door and just do some weaving while my son was sleeping was perfect. It was amazing timing, and I just never looked back. So here we are, and I have just been weaving since since 2014. Was it 2013 is when tapestry kind of became my primary medium. And then throughout those years, the yarns that I was using kind of were asked for by people, and they liked what I was using. And so I launched Everlea Yarn in 2018 when my son went to kindergarten and I had time to run a business, in theory. So my yarns are knitting. They're designed for knitting, but I use them for tapestry. I love them for tapestry. I have 3 weights of yarn. The 2-ply yarn is the fingering weight. It's 410 yards. And this is an example of it woven in tapestry. It's a tiny guy. And this is an example of it knit. And this is Denise Sang, who is a Vancouver designer. This is her amber shore shawl. If anyone's interested, I have 3 kits with these very yarns available. You would be purchasing the pattern separately on Ravelry, but these exact yarns are available in a kit. And I discounted shipping this weekend so that you guys, for a kit like this or any other combination of 3 or more balls of yarn, ships free. And then the next weight of yarn that I have is the 3-ply, which is the sport weight. And an example of the sport weight woven is this weaving here. And with tapestry, and the finer yarn you weave, the more detail you can get. And so this is kind of an example of, I guess I don't have 2 things that are very similar side by side to show you, but this is just a worsted weight here, and this is the sport weight here. And I don't know if you can tell, but the sport weight does give enough detail that I can tell a difference between the 2. A little bit more detail. And then moving on to, oh, actually, let's just show you my sport weight shawl. So this shawl is knit in the sport weight in a colorway that I call speckled cochineal. And it's cochineal, it's dyed in cochineal, which is the cactus beetle, and that has been used for centuries to dye textiles. And it has also been used by like companies like Starbucks for coloring their drinks. And in a really backwards way, people were in an upheaval because they preferred the synthetic alternative, which I find really backwards. But I think they actually changed their recipe because of that. I don't think they use it anymore. But this is called the Mark of the Hand shawl, and it's designed by Yvonne Stoll. And how she designed it is that it is a spiral that is seamed once we're done. And it starts here with 3 stitches and is knit with increases on every single row on the same side. So you're making kind of like I said, a spiral, and then it's seamed. And the way she designs and knits is that she doesn't actually tend to design knitting patterns. She designs and knits one-of-a-kind wearables that she sells, the finished objects. So she might even have a Mark of the Hand shawl available for purchase. But this shawl, she kind of tends to give herself exercises as she knits. If you're here today, Yvonne, hello. And this exercise was random welts and random ribs. So as she increased, and as the pattern increases 1 stitch for each row, she would increase and add either a knit or a purl to continue with this kind of random ribbed look. And then after a while, as she chose, she would just knit the entire row for a few rows and then just purl the entire, oh no, I think it's actually stockinette. So depending on where she started, it was stockinette or reverse stockinette in the welted sections here. And then she would go back to the random ribs. And so I fell in love with this shawl years ago and wrote it into a pattern with her permission. And I've knit a couple. This is another one, which is the full length one. And this one's knit in a single ply, or rather a 2-ply alpaca held double with a cobweb linen, which is what she designed hers in. It's alpaca held double with cobweb linen. Cobweb linen. Is that a tongue twister? Feels like it right now, or maybe I'm just nervous. Yeah, so, and then I was going to move on to the worsted weight. Worsted weight is a 4-ply, and all of my yarn bases are organic merino. So it's a 21, what's it? Oh my goodness, my nervousness is making me forget the term. What's the term? Oh my God, this is embarrassing. What's the term that refers to the softness of the wool?
Microns, is that it?
Microns, thank you. It's totally the nervousness. This is what happens with my brain. 21 microns, so it's not the softest, it's not the most coarse. And I like the 21 because it doesn't pill as much as like the 17 or the 18 or the 19. But it's still soft, it's merino. And that's what this base comes in. It's the organic merino is what I like to use because I like to have some sort of a system to push up against if I have questions about where the yarn is coming from. And this has already gone through a whole process. The organic status has 2 aspects to it. It's social, so there's fair wage along the entire production. And then also environmental, so the absence of chemicals in the making of the yarn, as well as the absence of plastics, which can be really common in the making of superwash yarns. This is technically has been descaled somewhat with a proprietary fermentation process that I'm not privy to knowing much about, but it has passed the organic certification. And then these yarns are also GOTS certified, so the Global Organic Textile Standard. And that covers all the things we just talked about, but also on top of that, anyone who distributes organic or GOTS certified yarns has to abide by environmental standards, even in their shipping practices. So I know that Estelle recently became GOTS certified, and they didn't offer their organic yarns. I think they didn't offer them before they got GOTS certified because they couldn't technically offer them until they were GOTS certified. So they recently had like a big influx of organic yarns in their line. And then, yeah, so that means that we know that Estelle is shipping in an environmentally friendly way, which is great. Okay, so what's I gonna do? Okay, so the worsted weight yarns are 4-ply and 210 yards. And this is an example of the worsted weight. knit up. And this is my manta ray shawl. It's a pattern that I wrote a few years ago. And it's written for a little linen shawl, which I actually do happen to have right here. I wrote it for this Everlea yarn, which is a fingering weight organic linen. And it's just a nice little neck ornament in the summer. Doesn't really have much of a utilitarian purpose. It drapes really beautifully, and it has these kind of welts in it. It's kind of hard to see in the linen, but with the worsted weight, I just used bigger needles and used the worsted weight yarn and changed the colors as I knit the welts. So it's garter stitch, and then the welts are stockinette. Yeah, I like the worsted weight yarn knit in a tighter gauge. So this is kind of looser than I would knit, say, a sweater in this yarn, because it does tend to be kind of stretchy and bouncy, and it's a lot nicer when it's knit with a bit more structure. So something I wanted to talk about was a little bit more about tapestry and a little bit more about what I offer in terms of tapestry education. So in 2018, Felicia Lowe of Sweet Georgia Yarns reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to teach for her online school, the School of Sweet Georgia. And I don't even know if I told her this yet, but when I got the email, I thought it was like a catch-all email that she was sending out to people. And when I got it, I was like, no, I could never. She would never want me to teach for her. And then I clicked the email and I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, she's asking me if I want to teach tapestry for her school. Of course I do, because everything Felicia does is so well done. And if I were ever to think about offering an online class, I would want it to be done really well, which is why I had never done it myself. And so that was a no-brainer. So in 2019, I released a 3-hour comprehensive tapestry workshop with the School of Sweet Georgia. And then I've continued to add to that roster of classes. So I've got techniques in tapestry as well, which is another 1-hour addition, a little bit some advanced and just some tricks and tips. And then I also have a series of articles. So the articles aren't behind the paywall. You can go to the School of Sweet Georgia in the link that I gave you at the beginning of the chat and scroll down, and the articles are below my classes. The classes are included in the membership, which with the membership, you get everything that's at the School of Sweet Georgia. So all of the workshops that she offers and her hired instructors offer. And it's $20 US a month for a membership. If you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get a link to some discounted offers. So I've got an option for, I think, 15% off any of the options. So a 1-month membership, a 3-month membership, or a 1-year membership. And that's one of the big reasons why I agreed to do that too with her, teach with her, is because of the accessibility of that. It's affordable. You can sign up for 1 month and then unsubscribe. And I like that it's not a $300. You don't need to spend like $300 to take a class. Yeah, so not that there's anything wrong with that. We all need to be paid, but it's nice to have these accessible options. Okay, so those classes, typically I suggest that you get a kind of more of a serious tapestry loom to take those classes, and you could make yourself on YouTube. I have a make your own PVC tapestry loom. You could also use copper, which is what that loom is inspired by, the Archie Brennan copper tapestry loom, which is just 6 pieces of 1 foot 3/4 inch copper with threaded rod. Do I have one around here? With threaded rod on either side of the frame so that you can increase the tension. Tension control is really important with tapestry because you want to be able to pack down your yarn. You want to be able to like really fiddle with things and get in there and do your thing. It's a really fun technique once you get into it. And having the right supplies is super important. But for a smaller tapestry, and if you just want to play around, a small loom without tension control is totally suitable. And it's a really fun way to start and just get into tapestry if you want to kind of just dip your toes in and see if it's for you. I've been teaching tapestry since 2013 or 14, and there's always a few people who are like, I'm never going to do this again because it just might not be your thing. It's a slow process. Like I said, it's one of the things that I love. And it's meditative, and you can just make whatever picture you want on the loom. It's pretty magical. The other cool thing about tapestry is going in, you tend to think that it's just over, under, and then yes, you make shapes and you fill in the shapes and you fill in the negative shapes, spaces. Yes, to some extent that's the case, but I'm still learning. Like there are so many things to learn about tapestry, so many tricks, so many ways to get smoother lines and make your dots and make your lines and make your shapes in different ways that are specific to the project that you're working on. It's a real problem-solving technique in the end. Honestly, you're never just sitting there mindlessly. You're always going, okay, what do I do next? And that's another thing that I love about it. So speaking of fun tricks and tips, so one of the things, and this will be in theory for most of you or for all of you if you've never woven tapestry, but one of the cool things about tapestry is that like I said, there's lots of tricks and tips and interesting things to learn, and one of them is how to make an angle that is nice and clean. No matter how thick your yarn is, you can get a nice clean diagonal like that, and it's specific to one side of the tapestry. So I weave tapestry with the back facing me. And in this case, I didn't for this little tapestry, but on my bigger pieces, like the one behind me, you can see all of my bobbins are hanging, and that's how I weave with the back facing me. But you'll see that nice clean diagonal, and on the other side, it's more stepped. So that trick is specifically just paying attention to whether you're wrapping around a warp that's raised or not raised. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a peek into like the technical part of tapestry and how you're always kind of got to be on the ball when you're weaving tapestry, and it's really fun for that reason. So I have a mini tiny tapestries workshop coming up on the 30th of May. And it's just $15. It's a 2-hour workshop. It'll be on Zoom, and we go over things like that, shape building, just simple tapestry, fundamental tapestry techniques specific to small tapestry. So it doesn't really overlap with my sweet Georgia workshops because that is more of a 12-inch and up type, or even 8-inch and up. The smaller tapestries have, I teach them in a totally different way. It's really just to get your like I said, your toes dipped into the technique. You don't need to buy something like this, but they are available in my shop. What you get with it is this little loom and a little selection of colors, as well as specific to the workshop, I'll be including paint chips that match the colorways of the yarn that I send you. And if you're not going to use these materials, which you wouldn't need to, you could go to the paint shop and get your own paint chips that match your own yarn. And all that you would need is something that's a 3-ply or more that's fingering, sport or worsted weight. And whatever yarns you're using, you just want to use multiple colors that are exactly the same yarn or same weight, so that your different sections are packing up at different rates, shape-wise. Yeah, what else? Those are on sale, these little kits here. You get these, and there's 2 different listings. One is just for these 2 guys with a set of tapestry needles, and then the other one is specific to the workshop, where you get the paint chips to go with the yarn, as well as a little archival glue stick. So here's a little example of the things that we cover, and we're talking about, is that upside down? Oh, no, it's good. Designing for tiny tapestries. So this is actually a really good example to show you. Here's the little design, but just to show you what the difference between working with a fingering weight yarn and a worsted weight yarn. You get a lot more detail. And that's essentially a yarn that's half the gauge. The fingering is half the gauge of the worsted. Does anyone, I haven't looked to see if there's any questions. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Yes. Okay, no questions. All right, well, if nobody has any more questions, does anyone, I'm trying to think, what else can I talk about? My dye sources. So one of the things that I love about natural dyes is that they age so beautifully, and just the alchemy of the process. All of my yarns have a 3-week cure process. So the yarns that aren't indigo have a 3-week cure process, and the indigo has a similar lead time because it has a off gas process. So it's kind of stinky unless you let it off gas for a bit. And I don't expect people to understand that aspect of indigo, so I will only send it to you once the stink is gone. Because it is quite stinky, I gotta say. Rebecca, you know what I'm talking about. Well, you actually like the stink, I think, don't you? I'm used to it, and yes, I can see you nodding. Some days I can't, I'm dyeing my indigo and I'm just like, I just don't feel like smelling this right now. But most days I'm used to it, right? It's my life. But some days it turns me off. But I work with mostly weld for my yellow. So weld is the yellow that it's cultivated in Europe mostly and originally, and it is the yellow that's used originally for like French tapestries. And then the greens would be made with yellow over dyed with indigo. And in my studies, actually, I learned that they dye the indigo first, they mordant it, and then they dye it with indigo, and then they over dye it with weld. I don't tend to do that. I tend to mordant, dye with weld, and then over dye with indigo for my greens. Do I have a green? I've begun doing workshops, or not workshops, markets again. And so I may not actually have a green to show you. Yesterday, greens were very popular. I have a green in this little. So this is dyed with weld and then over dyed with indigo. Another reason why one might want to dye with indigo first is because natural dyes are sensitive to pH, and indigo requires a certain pH. So if you dye with a color or a plant that's sensitive to pH, and then you over dye it with indigo, the pH of the indigo will essentially shift the color of your whatever it is you've dyed, and then over dye it with indigo. And so you might not get the desired color. So that's something to think about if you're playing around with natural dyes. My pinks are madder root. And I have been wanting to start a natural dye garden for years, but we rent. And we have been here 5 years. And so technically I could have started. Every year I think this, maybe I'll do it this year. And a lot of these dyes like weld and madder root, once you've planted them, it takes 2 years for the first harvest. And so I always go, well, I might not be here in 2 years. And anyways, it's been 5. I could have done it. But I don't think I will, because I still think we might not be here next year. So, and then my brown is arbutus. So I harvest arbutus here, just on the roadsides and the mountains. Anything that's fallen on the ground, I'll harvest. And then I mordant it with alum and also iron. And the mordants are what contribute to the light and wash fastness, the alum specifically, as well as the iron. But the iron will also shift the color. So this shifts to be a bit darker and a bit more green when you add the iron. And then my purples are logwood. So logwood is a cool one because so this is like a medium value, and this is a darker value of the same dye. And every time that I show this, the dark one looks black, and it reminds me to share that before the advent of synthetic dyes, logwood was industry black, because when logwood is dyed in combination with iron, it actually gets darker when exposed to sunlight as opposed to lighter. So over time, of course, it's not like a magical immediate thing, but so logwood dyed at this kind of depth of shade, and then with exposure to sunlight. I also heard that they specifically would use logwood for drapes for that reason. They wouldn't get sun bleached. They would just get deeper and darker. And like I said, natural dyes just get more and more beautiful as they age. So even more beautiful dark logwood. I think I may have been saying indigo accidentally when I meant logwood earlier. What else do I dye with? So madder root, weld, indigo, logwood. Those are my main ones. Brazilwood is a really fun one. I don't have any examples of that. And Osage is another yellow that I use. So a lot of these are from like logwood, Brazilwood, Osage, are heartwoods of those specific trees. And so it's not the core, it's not the bark, but it's kind of the wood that's in between that's used for the dye matter. And yeah, and then cochineal, which is the cactus bug. And this is some little speckles of cochineal that I have on here. So I grind them with a mortar and pestle and sprinkle them on the yarn, and it's one of the only ways that I'll do a speckle, because it is that easy. Yeah. Just check to see if there are any other questions. How did I end up on the Sunshine Coast? So I'm from Gibsons. I grew up here. My dad grew up here. He's lived on the same block his entire life in Lower Gibsons. My grandfather, my great grandfather, his grandfather built the house that I grew up in. My dad moved into it after it had been through a couple of family members. When I was 2, we moved in. But his mom and dad's house is 4 houses down from that house. So he's lived on the same block his whole life. And I moved to Vancouver when I was 18 or 19, and I moved back home unexpectedly when I was 22 due to a back injury. I had been volunteering across Canada with Vic. I don't know if any of you know about that program, but it was a really life-changing, amazing program where one youth from each province creates a group, and then we live together for 7 months. My group was a 7-month program. I think it's ranged between 6 and 9 months over the years. And so then we travel to 3 different destinations in Canada and learn our respective opposite languages. So we were learning French, they were learning English. There was a mix of us, as I said. And anyways, we were just having fun, and I had already had kind of a wear and tear issue on my back, and injured my lowest disc and had a herniation, but it wasn't diagnosed for a year. So I had to leave the program early. My mom had to quit her job to help me. I was in a wheelchair for a year. I don't know why I'm telling this whole story, but actually it is relevant, because that's when I learned how to knit, was actually when I was in the wheelchair. So that was a couple of years that I ended up staying back here on the Sunshine Coast before entering into university. So I actually started university here on the Sunshine Coast. There's a Capilano University campus, a really small one. And when I was injured, I was super bored and needing a distraction. So I went and did some university transfer courses, and eventually learned about the Capilano textile program and entered into that in 2008. So I think I moved to the city a couple of years before then. So 2006 or so, I moved back to the city. And then I moved to Montreal. And in Montreal, my partner fell in love with his research, which is in urban education, and entered into a PhD program in New York, just following our 3 years in Montreal. So we went from Vancouver to Montreal to New York, and then we were done with cities, so done with cities, and just wanted to come back home. And it was the year that we moved back was the first year that there was a growing housing crisis on the coast. The year before we moved, I had done a bunch of research, and there was no problems. There wasn't an issue with finding places to rent. And so when we decided to move a year later, I thought it would be the same. I don't need to like rush or like worry about finding a place. And I think it was just 2 months before we moved, I thought, oh, I should probably start looking at where to live and if we need, to look for a place. And that's when I learned that it was totally different. There was no places to be found. And so I knew at that point that we would have to look further up coast. And so I'm here in Madeira Park. We took the first place we got. We were super lucky, totally lucked out. We have an entire house. When we moved in, I had flown with my son from New York to BC viewed this place, applied to live here, and within, I think, 8 or 10 days, we moved in. And my partner was driving across the country with a U-Haul full of our stuff with his dad. And he got here and we moved into the house, I think within 2 or 4 days of him arriving here. And when I walked in, I only half remembered exactly the layout of the house and exactly, so I just remember coming and being like, this is great, sure, we'll take it if we can. And we applied. But I did remember, the one thing I remembered was my studio. I was like, that's my studio. And so when we walked in to the house and I showed my husband the place, I was like, so this is the house and that's my studio. And it's this massive, it's about 600 square feet. And he was like, oh, really? It's your studio, huh? It's like, yeah. But we're lucky enough that we do have enough space for such a big studio for myself. Yeah, so thanks for joining me. I hope that it was interesting and I chatted your ear off there at the end, but thanks for joining me in my studio, and I'm going to see if you have any other questions. This is where I get awkward. No more questions. I hope some of you will join me for the Tiny Tapestries workshop on the 30th of May. It's, like I said, a 2-hour workshop. It's going to be a lot like this, really personal, and we're just going to go over some fundamental textile techniques. It's $15, and then you'll have the replay for 6 months after. So even if you can't make it, you could sign up for it and rewatch it after. Yeah. Thank you. Is, oh my goodness, you guys, I'm so sorry. I should have given you at the beginning. Plant. My word is plant.